Now, in terms of the effects on the daily lives of Palestinians, Israel has been quite, shall we say, organized in the way it classifies Palestinians to discourage any sort of unity among them. And so Israel essentially creates 5 different classes of Palestinian, in decreasing order of the amount of rights they have. And the people with the most rights are citizens of Israel. These are often referred to as Arab Israelis to distance them from the broader idea of Palestinian statehood. Whereas a large percentage of them think of themselves as Palestinians, though by no means all, and you will meet Arab Israelis who will insist that they are Israeli, not Palestinian. Sorry. And Israel also likes to spin the idea that these people have the same rights as Jews within Israel. These are people with Israeli passports. They can travel where they want, work where they want. But in actual fact, they are largely disenfranchised. The parties they vote for only get 3 or 4 seats in the Knesset, and I don't know of any substantial block of Jewish voters that would ever vote for an Arab party. There's one new mixed one, but it's like every party on the Israeli left has seen almost no success in recent years as the Israeli society has moved rightwards. And you would think that people who have Israeli passports would be immune from things like house demolitions. But in fact, as I'll show you in a little bit, the village in the Negev of Al-Araqib, sorry, I have a throat thing. The village in the Negev of Al-Araqib, these are people with Israeli passports, with Israeli jobs. One lectures Hebrew literature, and nevertheless their houses were demolished. And in fact, one of my friends there, Salim, was arrested for trespassing inside his own house because Israel declared that it was state land and therefore he had no right to be on it. The second class of people is East Jerusalem residents, and this is the most precarious status you can have, because to live in Jerusalem, that was taken over in 1980, you have to prove that your life is centered there. And you have this little green card called the Jerusalem permit, which enables you to travel into Jerusalem through all the checkpoints that surround it, work there, live there. And basically, the Israeli authorities want to control the ethnic balance of Jerusalem. And this isn't, a surmise. It's not something people are guessing. It actually says in the Jerusalem planning master plan that the ideal proportion of Jews to Arabs in Jerusalem is 70 to 30. And they've had immense trouble maintaining this proportion, largely because the Arab birth rates are far higher. The only part of Israeli society that has comparable birth rates are the ultra-Orthodox, and they're also not necessarily that mainstream within Israeli society. And so the only way to counteract that is to remove the status of a lot of these East Jerusalem residents. And house demolitions are a major driver of this, because if your house gets demolished, you can no longer claim that you live in Jerusalem, because you technically no longer have a house there. And it is literally impossible for an Arab in Jerusalem to get a permit to build a house. And this has been true since 1967, and certainly since 1980. So for generations now. And as your family grows, it's traditional to add a floor to your house for your son when he gets married. Except that makes your whole house illegal. And so what Israel has done is made simply being a Palestinian in East Jerusalem illegal if you want to have a roof over your head. And so all these demolitions that they do are, in fact, within the boundaries of the law, because all the houses are illegal. And the only thing that controls whether your house gets demolished is how into demolitions the current government happens to be, how Israel thinks it will play in the international media, or sometimes it's just the whim of some sort of bureaucrat. And now, as the settlement of East Jerusalem, the Arab part of Jerusalem, has intensified, there's been more evictions, more demolitions, and we're seeing a lot more Jewish families moving into these Arab neighborhoods. And the excuse almost always is that the Arab families there have built illegally. Now, if a resident of Jerusalem loses his status, he's forced to move into the West Bank. Usually he'll have family in Ramallah or Nablus or something, and essentially he's getting evicted from the city that he grew up in, the city that his family's from, and being forced to move into a new area. And once you've lost your Jerusalem residence, you can't even enter Jerusalem. there's people who simply can never go there again. They've lost their status and they'll never get it back and they'll never see the city again. And this is one of the main ways in which Israel is trying to drive an Arab exodus from parts of the city so that the Jewish majority in the city remains unassailable. And the West Bank residents, it depends a lot. If they live in Zone A, they're under the authority of the Palestinian Authority, so they live largely like people in any other Arab country. But if they live in Zone C, which is under Israeli control, or Zone B, which is essentially under Israeli control, they can't build homes, their houses get demolished. If the military decides it wants a use for your house, suddenly you can't do anything. One of the most perverse examples I remember is one village called Beit Omar was trying to drill a new well because their current one had run dry because the water table had dropped. And the military controls whether this town, this completely Palestinian town under Palestinian Authority control, gets to build this well. And so they kept not giving permission, thinking of something. The prime minister intervened, and eventually they managed to get permission. And they had the U.S. aid provided drilling equipment to drill this well. And what Israel wound up doing was when the equipment arrived in Ramallah, they said it couldn't drive to the village because that would be on an Israeli road. And the drill bit was so long that were it to be stood upright, it would be an air hazard, which is, of course, completely absurd. But the idea is that the bureaucracy stifles absolutely any attempt by Palestinians to develop these places, and anything can be declared a military necessity, anything can be declared, a security threat, and thus a lot of these villages simply have no recourse. They're under Israeli control, they can't build new houses, they can't develop, they can't spread outward, and their lands are constantly being confiscated and their houses demolished. And so to be a West Bank resident is, obviously it's not the same as being a Gaza resident, where the blockade is in effect, but it's also involves substantial violations of your human rights. Now, Gaza residents, house demolitions in Gaza are now quite rare since the Israeli withdrawal, but the humanitarian situation there is obviously horrible. The Israeli blockade blocks immense amounts of very basic goods from coming in, especially building materials. It allows fruit to come in, but not seeds, for example. And the idea is, of course, that the economy can't get going. And the policy of Israel is generally so that there's no starvation, nobody dies, the society functions, but at the absolute minimal level. So there can never be economic growth, there can never be anything but just barely surviving misery.